Okay, so in this video, we are going to talk about why Dune 2 is a cinematic masterpiece. We're going to break down some of the component parts of the movie, such as the world building, the sound design, the cinematography, the acting, and the message of the movie, and how each part is executed at such a high level, and how that creates an experience that's greater than the sum of its parts. There are going to be no spoilers. I'm only going to be using clips from the trailers and some interviews that are available on YouTube. All right, let's start off with the world building. So Dune is pretty much a space opera where certain factions are fighting for power. It's kind of like Star Wars meets Game of Thrones. Now, in this world, there are no computers, but they have this resource called spice, and if you consume it, it grants you certain superhuman abilities, like being able to see into the future, or like being able to make very complicated calculations, like space travel. Spice can only be harvested on this desert planet called Arrakis, and there are a few factions that are vying for the control of said spice production. In one corner, we have the Atreides, which are obviously the good guys, and you have the Harkonnens, are very obviously the bad guys. You have the Fremen, which are the native people of the desert planet, and then you have the Bene Gesserits, who are these witches that can see into the future and are controlling everything a little bit from behind the scenes. Each faction has their own costume, their own way of speaking, their own design language, and even soundtrack. And it creates a world that feels very lived in. Like if you see a spaceship, you kind of know which faction it belongs to because of this consistent design language. And in this story, you have the main character, Paul, played by Timothée Chalamet, who is supposed to be the messiah figure.
The first artist that I approached to help me to do so was Hans Zimmer. Hans is, like me, a massive fan of the novel. Hans gave me a warning. Is it a good idea to tackle your childhood dreams? Are we meant to fail?
Now, one of the things that initially struck me as so impressive was the sound design. And I mean everything from the score to the sound effects. But it does this thing that I don't think I've seen being done in any other movie, which is where it perfectly blends the sounds that the characters would hear from the musical score. So this is what I mean. If you watch Star Wars and you hear the sound of a lightsaber,
under arrest, Chancellor,
which is very iconic, you know that that's a sound that a character in the story is supposed to hear. And then when you hear John Williams' score, you know that that's just the soundtrack that's meant for the audience to hear. But when they were designing some of these sounds, Hans Zimmer worked with the sound designer to ask themselves, what would the actual creatures or vehicles sound like if they were real?
Richard King, our sound designer, who is, I'm just going to say it, who's the god of sound designers for me. You know, when you see a huge harvester, this huge machine, you know, leave some room for Richard, you know, and at the same time he is a gentleman and he will leave some room for me. So there's this constant sense of trading off and collaborating.
I asked Richard King to go back in the desert and to make sure that we will hear that specific sound of the hissing of the sand that sounds almost like a strange singing. I was very pleased with the sound, the crew that were able to bring back that specific sound that we were hearing all the time in the desert.
What would a giant sandworm sound like if it had to move that much volume of air and sand?
I was absolutely pleased with the sound design, but that the sound that it will emulate will be inspired by the friction of such a beast against the rock and the sand. You will feel almost like it's a bending building against the wind or something. The sound of a lake, frozen lake in winter in Canada, where you have like those eerie, incredible singing sound that I feel absolutely surreal. And I wanted to convey that kind of where nature goes in a direction with the sound that is absolutely unpredictable, that feels very grounded in the reality of the image, but feels still as there's a connection with the surreal. Richard King absolutely nailed that.
So when you see an object and it sounds like how you expect it to sound, it just kind of makes sense. But it gets even better when they blend those realistic sound effects, the ones the characters would hear, perfectly with the score. And there's even a scene in the trailer that perfectly does this. And the movie is so good at balancing the sound effects with the score to emphasize emotional moments, tense moments, and it's all just so good. And you have to see it in theaters to experience how loud and powerful the sound is. It just makes the world feel so real.
Cruelty. You've been fighting the Harkonnens for decades. My family's been fighting them for centuries. They were massacred.
The advantage I have is that I have a partner in Denis Villeneuve who is sort of on the same side.
But we can't talk about how real the world feels without talking about the visuals. Denis Villeneuve, God, is there a better director working today who's just so known for gorgeous visuals?
I'm madly in love with a shot like that. When I was drawing storyboards sometime with Sam Udeki, we were just doing a line with a tiny dot. It's just like there's something about the purity, bringing back the human as its right scale in the landscape, like an ant in contact with the immensity, with the meditative impact of the desert that I think is very powerful.
I feel like that's his style, and in Dune, he brings it. I saw this interview where he talked about how he wanted to film as much of the scenes outside with real sunlight because he said the real sunlight gives you a certain intangible grittiness that makes the world feel real.
And the right one with the right sun position, because we didn't use any artificial light in the desert shooting part 2 like we did in part 1. It's like it brings a level of high realism and a feeling of a strong tactile sensation that you feel with the nature that I was looking for. All these shots have been made in a real landscape. I insisted that there will be no CG element here apart from, of course, the worm.
He talked about how they built their own sand dunes, how some scenes, the perfect lighting was at early in the morning. And if they missed it, they had to wait until the next day. And for one scene, they had to blow tons of sand into the actors.
The platform was surrounded by massive fans. We were throwing an insane amount of dust on the stunt. Tons of dust were used in that sequence in order, I wanted really to feel that the character is going through waves of sand and disappear into the dust, and to feel that he has to master the elements. The action of sand riding involve a lot of violence and danger.
It's just absolutely mind-blowing, the dedication to the craft. And not only that, there were some shots that were just so gorgeous. Some of the best eye candy I've ever seen in a movie.
May thy knife chip and shatter. Who's it? Because all my...
In the shadows of Arrakis lie many secrets.
This world is beyond cruelty.
I won't be fighting for him.
And one of the best black and white scenes I've ever seen in a modern contemporary movie.
Show me who you are.
And the whole time that you're watching, I think one of the best things that Denis Villeneuve pulls off is a sense of scale. There are some shots that really contextualize how small people are compared to this giant creature, how huge the gladiatorial arena is, how big the spaceships are, how many people there are in the crowd. It just has this epic sense of scale. But it's not all about just going big, because the emotional moments are incredibly intimate. The one-on-ones feel so personal.
The way Denis mixed it as well in the film is like the whole atmosphere shifts, and it just becomes this incredibly intimate moment.
So whether he's playing with the scale on such a macro level or a micro level, he achieves this amazing dynamic scale to this world that just makes the whole thing feel epic.
I will say that there are some sequences, like this one, the worm ride, that is very, very close to the dream.
You dive in.
Yes, it's called swimming.
I don't believe you.
And so let's talk about some of the characters that inhabit this world. The casting and the acting in this movie is fantastic. Whether some of the actors are coming back to Dune Part 2 and they reprise their roles, whether they are completely new to the Dune series, everyone is so well casted and they pull off their roles perfectly. I was very impressed by Zendaya's acting range because I don't really think she got to showcase that in the Spider-Man series, because in a world that feels so harsh and alien, their relationship just feels really relatable. And speaking of Timothée Chalamet, I loved him in this movie. I loved him in this role as Paul, the Messiah figure. Because after I saw Dune Part 1, I felt a little bit skeptical, not gonna lie. I was like, so you're telling me that this scrawny, pretty boy is going to be the leader? Okay then. And it works so well because if you have that doubt, he can use that to his advantage in the story, because as this rising Messiah figure, he needs to win people over. If you are uncertain whether Timothée Chalamet can even pull something off like that, well, guess what? Now he has to win you over. And so as he starts getting more powerful, as he starts gaining followers, he's constantly asking you, are you going to follow me? And your response, depending on where you are in the story, is going to change. You should go see for yourself whether he wins you over.
When the first novel came out, Frank Herbert was disappointed the way the book has been perceived. He felt that the reader were thinking that Dune was a celebration of Paul Atreides, but right the opposite. His intentions were to make a cautionary tale, a warning toward messianic figures.
And finally, I want to talk about the message here, the allegories. In this world, the entire economy functions off of this one resource called spice that they have to harvest in nature under extremely harsh conditions. And it made me think, do we also in our world have this resource that underpins the entire economy that we just can't get enough of, that is extracted under harsh conditions in nature? Yeah, I think I could think of one. And then Paul becomes a Messiah. And it made me think, is there a Messiah figure in our real world that asks people to follow him and led to lots of wars and conflict? Yeah, I think I can think of one. But the movie's never really in your face about it. And so you get to go to the movies and forget about your problems of your world, get to enjoy watching this, but when you come out of the movies, it is kind of in the back of your mind. And isn't that what amazing art should do?
It's not a prophecy. It's a story.
And so, when you combine all of these elements, the world building, the sound design, the cinematography, the acting, the message, and you mash it all up together and everything is executed at such a high level, and there's so much respect for the source material and the craft and the artistry, it created such an immersive experience.
You are not prepared for what is to come.
After almost 3 hours, I wanted more. When's the last time you left a 3-hour movie saying, I didn't get enough? And look, there might have been movies that you just had to see in theaters, like Top Gun Maverick. And there are movies that might have moved you emotionally, like Past Lives. And there were movies that were cultural events, like Barbenheimer. But I don't remember the last time a movie was just all of these things. It was a movie you had to see in theaters. It was so emotionally moving. It was a cultural event. Probably not since Lord of the Rings was there a movie event that felt like this. Like, this is what Star Wars should have been. Dune 2 was such an artful masterpiece. Please do yourself a favor and go see this in theaters while you still can. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.